Hi, this is Pierre Sabak, and today I'm going to be talking to Bruce MacDonald and John Edmonds. Now, Bruce MacDonald wrote the book Stardust Ranch, and John Edmonds was the actual guy who experienced the strange phenomenon associated with the ranch in terms of ghost manifestation, poltergeist, and also alien manifestation. So I'm going to begin, first of all, by asking John how the book was structured and how this project actually began. So, yeah, do you want to just give me a basic overview of the book and particularly its structure?
Sure, Pierre. I'd be happy to.
Hi.
Our situation is that Bruce and I met through another third party, Tommy Hawksblood in Hawaii. And what we ended up doing was having discussions back in 2012 about all the strange phenomena that was occurring here at Stardust Ranch out here in Rainbow Valley, Arizona. And what ended up happening was we decided to go ahead and create a book. And it was based on the idea that Bruce would go ahead and interview me extensively. I would tell the story. He would extrapolate the information from the story and go ahead and create a bigger point of view. And then in 2012, things started getting strange because a lot of the things that started being dissed on a discussion basis on the phone actually started affecting Bruce's world, and he got pretty spooked by it. And he called me up and he said, "John, I don't want to do the book. It's just too weird. It's too creepy." And so we actually separated and had no contact for about 7 years there. And then one day he called me up and he said, "John, do you still want to do the book?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to finish the book." And he said, "It's the only book I've never finished. I have to finish it." And I said, "Terrific, let's do it." And so we began working again every day. And then gradually we got got our feet under us, and we created the story, created the information, and then Bruce put it all up and turned it into a manuscript, and here we are.
Wow, that's brilliant. I'm very interested in terms of why you actually broke off, Bruce, from the project initially. Was there one particular experience which really spooked you out, or was it just that there was a combination of different reasons?
Yeah, excellent question, Pierre. First of all, let me say at the outset, I'm a big fan of your work. I think what you've done is absolutely brilliant. I don't know how you did this. What you've done with the holographic universe and the murder of reality is just mind-boggling.
Right, thank you.
And yeah, I'm not trying to be ingratiating. Well, how does it affect the writer? Okay, so I'm going to speak to you as what I would call a higher order consciousness. I really like the way you speak about imaginal space and things like this. The first thing it does is it gets into your imaginal space.
Yeah.
And it's there all the time. And then it starts to bleed through in your reality. So the first time I wrote the book, it was just, there was anything really overwhelming in terms of my exterior time-space continuity. It's just the subject itself was overwhelming for me, and in my defense, because the way John says it, I sound a little bit cowardly in 2013. This has happened to like a half dozen writers who have tried to work with John. Right? They all quit halfway through. Now, what happened? Just like the introduction of the book, in 2014. After 20 years or so in high tech as a technical writer in telecommunications and software, I decided to move to Costa Rica, and I've moved to the Garden of Eden, the Talamanca Mountains, and the UNESCO Heritage Site, probably the most biodiverse 1,000 square kilometers on the planet. We built several structures here. We did hyperadobe, which is sometimes called earth bag construction, and I was living here a couple of years, and I said, I should probably finish that book with John, And this environment turned out to be a lot better to work on this kind of material, but it came here too. I mean, and you can feel it when it's all around you. It affected my wife, and this time there were very demonstrable manifestations. And then after about 7 days of working on the book, and when I work, it's all I do. I don't write a book in my part-time. It's like beyond OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And
that's the right way to write a book, I think, to be obsessed with it.
yeah, it just comes in from everywhere. It's not really a linear process. And this ball of white light appeared in my house after 7 days and just cleaned out all of these energies that had gathered in the house since I started the book. And I would describe this gray energy. People ask me what it's like. There was no visual element to it, but you just feel it, right? And people say, what's it like? Well, in terms of paranormal phenomenon, I would describe it as just a slight kind of white noise in your consciousness, almost like a small mosquito at your ear when you're camping, but it never goes away. It sort of just builds and builds and builds, and that's what I call the gray energy. And that's my answer.
Yeah, it's kind of, your answer is very interesting, because I had an experience with a person who's living, and I could see them in my room, but I couldn't see them simultaneously. Is that similar to the experience that you had with the ball of light, that it was both manifest visibly but also invisible, this almost paradoxical way of seeing?
No, this was completely visible. My wife took a picture of it on her cell phone. I'll send it to you after the interview.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. If you could send me any images to do with what we're talking about today, then I can use them. That would be very useful in terms of promoting this interview. So your interpretation of this, do you see that this was alien, interdimensional, poltergeist activity, demonic, angelic? I mean, obviously they're all interrelated at some level, but how did you view this energy, this white ball of energy?
Only that I felt that it was extraterrestrial. My wife felt that it was angelic.
Right.
I felt extraterrestrial, but positive, very, very positive. And it was here for about 10 minutes. Like this wasn't just like a flash of appearance. I really don't know what to tell you, Pierre. I mean, maybe it was technology. I don't know, but it really happened. And there was a very peaceful feeling in the house after it happened. It was like it cleaned out the house.
Okay. Was there a download of information? Now, the reason why I ask this is that in the ancient biblical and the apocrypha traditions, the seraphim or the erin are known as the shining ones. One of the principal reasons why they're known as the shining ones is that they communicate telepathically through light. So light is often indicative of a type of communication. So I'm just wondering if there was some type of interaction there.
Oh, the book finished itself quite easily after that apparition. I mean, there was no what I would call direct download. Now, most of that apparition of light, as I understand it, I mean, it permeates all through spiritual tradition, right? It really comes up quite strongly in northern India after Guru Nanak and Kabir, but it's always internal.
Yeah.
When you're meditating, what was really weird about this, Pierre, was it was completely external. And I've been meditating for 35 years. I've never had an external blast of light like that.
Right. Would you describe it as organic light?
I don't know.
Okay. Can I just bring John into this? John, when Bruce was having these type of experiences, was there an interaction in terms of when you were both writing the book together? Did things speed up in terms of manifestations, or did things go quiet for a while? Did you see, was there some kind of connection between this project and what was going off on your ranch?
It's difficult to say because we get so much activity out here on a regular basis, and it seems to be irregardless of, anything else. I mean, almost every day we have sightings of either the Greys coming and going. They're not so aggressive anymore, which is wonderful. But we have other types of beings. We have other species. We have all sorts of things that just come and go. It's almost as if it kind of reminds me of sort of a cosmic bus station or train station, and that everything is happening here. It comes and it goes. It goes through the portals, and whatever shows up, it doesn't often stay here for a long period of time, but it transitions from here through here to somewhere else. And so it seems to be pretty much, it doesn't seem to care whether we're here or visitors are here. There's no stealth to it or any kind of direct intervention into our lives anymore. It's just as if we're all in the same place at the same time, even though it seems like it might be multidimensional.
Okay, so it's almost like you've accepted its presence and this presence has accepted you. Was that different initially in terms of the experiences?
Oh, yes.
Right, okay.
Very different. I mean, you know, I never had any idea what was here when I moved here. I just wanted to raise horses, and I wanted to be out in the countryside of the desert. And so we moved out into the area, and, you know, it's about 1 million acres of wild desert out here. And we have direct access to about 680,000 acres around us of nothingness. Let me turn off that.
So when you moved to the ranch, what was your belief system in terms of poltergeists, extraterrestrials, and the larger reality? Did you really think about this, or was you agnostic, or completely just oblivious to this otherness?
Yeah, I've always been a strong believer in God. I've always had a great amount of faith. But I had no idea about the rest of this stuff. I knew there were things out there, but I had no reason to believe that I was going to have any kind of interaction with them. It just sort of started showing up, and I was like, well, this is interesting. At first, it was kind of exciting. And, you know, I didn't see it as a big threat. And I felt that I was kind of bigger than life anyway, and the fact that I could pretty much handle myself. I grew up in a pretty tough place, and so I was used to struggling with, you know, people that had decided that whatever I had was theirs. And so I really had no issue with it at first. But then when it became, you know, worse, and it began to attack my animals and attack my wife, then I had a real problem with it. And that's when we became in direct conflict. And it just got worse and worse over the years.
Right. Okay. That sounds interesting. I'd like to take you all the way back, and I want to go back to how you structured your book, and that way we can maybe get a chronological sequence of. Bruce. Yep.
I think John. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Either way is fine.
Okay, you go ahead first.
Go ahead. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you want to try and answer that, Bruce?
Yeah, so, I mean, you said at the beginning that I wrote the book and that John is the subject. Really, we co-wrote it. I mean, when I do, and I'm doing another book like this on another subject, in your neck of the woods, Pierre, this one's centered in Europe. My subject is in Europe. But what I do is of course, I have a journalism degree, and I've been a technical writer for 25 years. I've published some literature. I would call myself a literate man. I love poetry. My favorite poet is probably the former poet laureate of England, Ted Hughes. But this kind of work, I consider it like it's a kind of journalism. So when I work with someone like John, it takes place over 4 to 6 months. We talk every day, and I record and I transcribe everything, and then I start to put it together. And the hardest thing about John's book, it was a chronology. I said, look, I don't want to write some kind of phony scientific work like Skinwalker Ranch, you know, or anything like that. I said, I really want to tell a story, but I'll be damned if I can find a 3-act structure here. Like, this is impossible. I can't find a beginning, I can't find a middle, and I can't find an end. So John and I talked about everything. Like, this is his book and my book, and I said, this is what I think I'm going to do, is I'm going to do your structure like an expanding concentric circle. Just the further we go in time in your story, the more the consciousness of the story is going to expand to represent what you've learned living on that ranch 23 years. And John said, that sounds fantastic, do it. And that explains the ending. Some people love the ending, some people don't. But I have no opinion. I just, thank God I finished that book.
Well, I like how you tied together So basically, you do have some kind of chronology in terms of the beginning and the middle of the book, in terms of what
I do.
happened on the ranch. But
Yes.
towards the end, then you pull together all these different strands, and you really focus on the nature of this phenomenon, which, when we tie it down,
Yeah.
is really based upon consciousness. And so I thought it was a very
Yeah.
successful way of actually ending the book. And in terms of my own research, what I liked about your book is that my work is very academic. It goes into etymology, it goes into the derivation of words. But what I found very interesting was that your book was almost experiential in terms of what I'm talking about. So I found that the work was very complementary, and it was very timely that it kind of just dropped on my table when you actually emailed me, because I had just finished Holographic Culture, and it really confirmed a lot of the research that I had been doing. But I'd been reading Arabic and Hebrew and Latin and Greek dictionaries. So again, that for me was extremely illuminating. Right, John, do you have any opinions in terms of how the book was structured, or in terms of how you worked together and how the book gradually was formulated between both of you?
Well, I found it very refreshing, that Bruce was able to listen to the stories, because the stories are endless. We could have done 3 or 4 books just on all the stories alone. But and granted, people love to hear the stories. But the thing about it is that stories that don't go someplace in terms of helping somebody to realize something to reflect upon, something to grow from. You might as well just be reading a comic book. And so, we wanted something to be significant here that meant something that was going to be timeless, that people, 50 years, 100 years from now could look back and say, this is one of the very first times that somebody took their story and put it in a frame, and then put that frame in a bigger frame so that people could understand and grow and learn from it. And, that was the whole thing. It was to be a platform, for future growth, future books, something that, the ranch is an unusual phenomena, but it's a lot more than that. This is, as far as I know, one of only 1 or 2 places on the planet where people and ships and everything else not only go through the portals, but they also are trans-dimensional in terms of time. And, we have seen all sorts of examples of this, from Roman soldiers, walking through, to, literally being able to smell and talk to and hear individuals in ancient Egypt. And as far as we know, there's not any other location really that can do that. We know that there are portals where people can go from point A to point B on the surface of the Earth, and maybe even go to other planets. But we had never heard of anything like this in terms of being able to cross time with it. And so, it's a very significant thing. We're just getting to the point now where we understand it a little bit more. I have teams of people arriving regularly, coming in, studying, and doing things. I mean, I've had people now here off and on for the last 2 months, and they're even here right now, that are working with the energies here and the phenomena here to understand it better. So it's the book has opened up not only an understanding of the phenomena, but it's also become a bridge for the world in terms of people that have information about this to come here and study it and explain it to us.
Okay. Well, in terms of talking about these beings that are interdimensional, obviously my second book, Holographic Culture, studies this phenomenon in terms of that these beings which have deconstructed the mechanics of the waveform so that they can control both the waveform but also the particle. This is why that they are represented paradoxically in the biblical and apocryphal traditions. Now, you mentioned about Egypt, and there's this small little vignette in the story in which you mentioned that you experienced something to do with Egypt. Now, there's only a few lines on that, and I kind of was hanging on tanterhooks, because it was almost like, I don't know if the story was personal and so therefore you didn't really want to go into too much detail. Can you explain what this experience was in relation to ancient Egypt? Was there a reason why you summarized the story very succinctly?
Well, the thing about it is that there's a central character, a real person involved here, And we approached her. She's a good friend of mine, but she was uncomfortable having the information in the book. And that person is somebody that literally spent, I don't know, 6 or 8 months here on an off and on basis. And for some reason, the portal absolutely adores her. And whenever she's around, it basically receives her and accepts the fact that if she wants to go ahead and have an experience, the portal will literally open and provide her an opportunity to communicate with whatever time or place she wants to take it to. And so at one point, she and I were researching some things in ancient Egypt, and the portal just took that information and seemed to decide that it was going to create a bridge. And we not only had a visual, but we had an auditory, and we had the smell sensation to be able to have that connection. And so she was speaking directly to a priestess in ancient Egypt, and somehow or another they understood each other. And, you know, we had the whole experience for probably 30 minutes. And we've had, you know, regular experiences like that whenever she's here. So, but she was uncomfortable having the information in the book. So that's why we could only just touch on it a bit.
I do have a question here. And in your opinion, do you think that what you saw, do you think that you were transported back into time, or do you think it was put into your head psychically or psychologically? Do you think it was a hologram? What's your take on this? How do you internalize that experience? How do you explain that experience? Is it psychic? Is it real? Is it holographic?
No, it's real. It's definitely real. I mean, I can't imagine that it could be holographic or anything less than real.
Do you think you went back into time through the bridge or the portal in some way? Or your mind?
Well, I know we didn't go back in time. All we did was imagine looking at like a giant big screen TV and being able to see back into the past in the real time moment, and it would be the equivalent of that. But it has more than just a flat screen type of TV effect. I mean, it is 3-dimensional. You can actually, it's as if you could just walk right through it and be there.
Did it change your opinions about ancient Egypt in any way, or was there a download of information? Or
I wish I could tell you that I'm real educated about all this, but I'm not. I had no real good previous knowledge. I mean, the only thing I ever had was field trips when I was in school back east, to museums and things like that, and a few, interesting courses in, archaeology and anthropology in the old days when I was in school. I really had no, direct knowledge at all. I mean, we were literally sitting there with these books on ancient Egypt and reading about it, and all of a sudden, to the left of us, it opened up this pathway, and we began to see what was happening on the other side and smell it and hear all the sounds, and that was it.
I'm guessing this was a two-way process. So was there a reason why the priestess contacted yourselves?
I don't know that she contacted us. It was like we were just privy to seeing what was going on there. I don't know that there was any purpose on her part. I'm not even positive she was directly aware of us. It was two spaces brought together by a tunnel, for lack of another, a reason or a way to describe it. It was two spaces in time connected by some kind of a bridge.
Okay. Now there is an there is an extension to this experience. I know that they're probably not related in time, but you mentioned that you had an experience in which you saw Roman centurion soldiers.
Yes.
Out of interest, now they seemed to walk through the wall, so they were obviously at some other level, maybe not quite at a physical level, even though they appeared to be physical. Do you think that they were coming through the tunnel, or was this just a projection from this portal?
I can't really say. I mean, my wife and I had only been in the house a couple of months, and the power went out. There was no power. We had been watching a movie and on the TV, and when the power went out, all of a sudden, from the far corner of the house, we saw the flicker of what looked like black and white, almost like an old-time movie projector. And then we were mesmerized because we saw these two men walk through, and they were wearing full Roman soldier type of outfits. With one held a spear, one held a sword at his side, and they just walked along like they were walking along a path. You know, in ancient Rome, someplace you could see trees, you could see scenery. I mean, it wasn't just them. It was like we had this cutaway version where we saw literally a different time and a different space. And somehow or another, it was in our house, in our environment. And they walked right past us, never saw us, and they seemed three-dimensional, and then walked out the other end and disappeared, and that was it. It was over. The whole thing lasted maybe, I don't know, 45 seconds to a minute.
What color tunics were they wearing? And then
the leather, like the leather, you know, like a leather, I don't know, some kind of leather tunic and swords. They both had swords, but one held a spear, a long spear, and they had on helmets, and you know, they looked like they were marching off to battle somewhere.
Okay, right. I'm going to go to Bruce now. I think Bruce has got a point which he'd like to add.
Yeah, I'm, you know, I've been dying to ask you this question, Pierre. Okay, so, you know, in your work, you do a brilliant job of, you know, expressing this phenomenon of these orders of beings above us and how they communicate with us. A lot of it is through the interior, because I think one of the reasons we've lost a lot of that now, whereas every pre-modern society had a relationship with non-physical beings, whether it be fairies or what, you know, but we've externalized ourselves so much. But what I wanted to ask you was a question about duality, because, you know, my story is so dualistic. I have this really kind of thick feeling around me the first 7 days I'm trying to work on John's book. It's non-physical, and then something comes in and clears it out. So when you talk about the, you know, the angels and the seraph and everything, the seraphim, when does the duality happen? Like, who's Gabriel and Michael, and who's Mammon, Moloch, and Belial?
Okay. Well, the names of angels, from my understanding, are that they're personifications. So, for example, Michael, Michael is a container. So, Michael, a container of God, would be symbolic of the angelic host, because in my work I talk about that the angels are like sailors. So Malak, an angel, is a polymorphic noun of Malak, which is a sailor. So in that respect, the names are personifications. It's the same with Raphael. Rapha it's coming from the root to heal or to stitch, which is denoting a grafted or stitched bloodline, which are equated with the reframe. The reframe, again, denotes the ghost, but is polymorphic and can also denote the giants, which is this stitched bloodline. So I see that the angelic names are not necessarily individuals, but are used to refer to personifications, in the same way that Gabriel would be connoting the Gibborim. Gibbor is Orion. So, yeah, Gabriel, the man of God, is denoting the Gibborim, which is Orion. Gibbor is Orion. The Gibborim are equated with the Titans or the Nephilim. So that's how I view the angels. In terms of dualism, in terms of good angels and bad angels, the fallen angels are just basically mutineering angels. So there is, if you like, a hierarchy. We would describe it in modern parlance as a federation, a space federation. But those angels which rebelled or mutineered, they are the fallen angels. So I think that's essentially the answer. Is there anything else that you?
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Right.
One follow-up. Would you say that Earth is the territory of the fallen?
No, I would say that obviously there's a conflict over the earth and there are different factions, and there is a tendency at the human level to want to say the good side are the humans or the bad side are the reptilians and vice versa. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. There are different factions, and again, I also think that some of the angelic orders themselves are they're very much like humans in terms of that they are limited by their conditioning, and some of these beings may also may be subject to mind control as well. So again, they themselves could be a victim of the overriding hierarchy. I think also in terms of the angelic order, when I talked about, you see the old Aramaic word for an angel, Zar is an angel, but it's polymorphic. Zar also means an alien or a visitor or a stranger.
Wow.
And again, it's related to the Hebrew word Khazar, which is the modern word for a space alien, which actually interfaces with the Elake, which is a high god. Elake is polymorphic because it can also translate as a high creature. Sometimes the terminology is referred to as a living god, but this is because the deities were considered to be living, and they are dematerialized. So, if you like, because they control the waveform, you have the waveform, which are the Ruach Elohim, which are the high spirits, but they can then materialize physically as an LRK. But this is another important point which I think the viewers need to be aware of, and that's that the angels, that they have not only deconstructed the mechanics of physical reality, so they exist outside of time and space, but they also understand the imaginal realm, the realm of ideas, which is in Platonic thinking, universal forms. And these universal forms is basically the implicated order, and the implicated order is externalized. It becomes the explicated order. So they can traverse the world of ideas, which is the world of spirit. And so they, in many respects, are the masters of all worlds. So I think John is trying to come in there. So is there anything that you want to add to that, John?
No, I think that's actually a very good explanation. Thank you.
Right. So I want to take you all the way back, because I'm kind of interested in how these experiences, they start off very slowly, almost like subconsciously you feel that something is just maybe not quite right, but you can't put your finger on it, and then they gradually snowball into multiple experiences. And I know that when you moved into the ranch, first of all, that you had what must have been a very disconcerting and strange experience in terms of where all the furniture was taken from the house and plonked into the swimming pool. So can you elaborate upon some of the earlier experiences and how they gradually snowballed into multiple different types of manifestations?
Well, I can tell you, I've done a lot of traveling in my time, and certain places around the world that I've been to, I just felt like they were magical, and I felt they were important, and I felt like, very blessed to be able to even witness them. When we got to the ranch, we had already looked at many, many properties that we had found we thought that we could purchase that were in our price range. And so, we didn't find anything that met with our needs to continue our careers, plus gave us everything we needed for the horses and things like that. We finally found this place, and we thought, wow, okay. In my mind, I was sold 5 minutes after I saw it. I said, that's it. It's perfect. And, Joyce just looked at me. My wife, Joyce, just looked at me, and she looked at this place, and she's like, dear God, what is wrong with this man? And, I was sold on it, and she was just absolutely unsold on it. And so we ended up getting it anyway. We kind of struggled between us a bit, and I just told her, I said, look, this is as good as it's going to get. We're not going to find anything for the kind of money we're talking that we can afford that allows you to keep your career and allows me to keep my career. And we finally hashed it out and decided to go ahead and pay for it and buy it. And I paid cash for it. And I thought, done deal. Now it's just about, getting the place set up for us and customizing it a little bit. Well, as soon as we got to the property, we began to have issues. And the very first week that we were here, the gentleman that's over time, Jimmy Church, named him the Machete Man, ended up coming out and came to the property and walked on the property the very first day we moved in. And, he walked up the front driveway, and I went outside, and at that time, realizing that I was living in the middle of the wilderness, I decided to adopt the idea of owning a gun. And so I took my gun and put it down the back of my pants and walked out there. So I didn't want to scare him, but he had this giant, like big, huge machete, and he was just kind of flipping it in front of him as he walked. And I walked up to him and I greeted him and I asked him what he was doing here on the property. And he said, "Well, I live in the back there." And I said, "What do you mean the back there?" And he said, "Well, you see that house there at the end of the path?" And I said, "Yes, that's going to be my tack room for my horses." And he says, "Well, that's where I live." And I said, "Well, what is your purpose here?" And he said, "Well, my job here is to kill monsters." And I, probably looked a bit surprised. And I said, "What monsters?" And he said, "Well, there's monsters around here. And if you don't do something about them, you'll be in a lot of danger." And I said, "Well, nobody's told me about any monsters. The realtors didn't say anything. The people that lived here didn't say anything. You're the first thing that I've seen that's completely out of place." And he just looked at me, and I said, "I really don't have any need for a monster killer currently." And I said, "I'd appreciate it if you gather your things and leave." And so he went back and he took a bed sheet and grabbed his stuff and rolled it up in it and put it over his shoulder and traipsed away. And he looked back at me and he said, "You're going to be really sorry that I'm not going to be here." He said, "Who's going to kill the monsters?" And I just said, "Well, I'll take care of that job." And off he went. I never saw him again. So that was just even the very first day. And then we ended up with, the whole thing with the pool, with all the belongings that belonged to the people that were here. We showed up to move in and all their stuff was still in the house. And so I called the realtor and I said, "What's the deal here? We can't move in because these people haven't moved out." And so he ended up making the arrangements to have these people remove their things, allegedly. We came back later on and found out that all of their things, including all their personal papers, the whole 9 yards, everything was in the pool. Pool was turned on and it was stacked up about 6 feet over the top of the pool, over the surface of the water. And I was just horrified. And I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe all this stuff is going on. I hope it's not going to be like this for the future." But unfortunately, it did kind of turn out to be sort of letting us know that this place was going to be nothing but strange. And it's, 23 years later, and it's lived up to its reputation. It's always been strange.
Just out of interest, I know that the pool incident was one of the first, if you like, supernatural experiences that you witnessed. But when this occurred initially, did you think that somebody was playing a prank on you, or was you thinking that this is actually so strange and so unbelievable? Because again, I think that the amount of furniture and the amount of time it actually took to put in the pool was actually quite extraordinary in itself. So was you already thinking that this is very peculiar and unusual?
I did, but I was mostly angry because there was nobody. I asked the realtor to help me to drag it all out, and there were appliances, refrigerators, washers, dryers, everything was in the pool. And I was just angry because, it was the first home I'd ever bought. And I was thinking to myself, this is not the way things are supposed to be. When you buy a house, you're supposed to have at least some kind of honeymoon period, where everything's great and you love the place and nothing goes wrong for a while. Well, it was anything but that. So I was quite disturbed. I was very distraught over the whole thing.
Yeah, I want to just ask Bruce a question now. And in terms of all of the various different stories, what do you think is your favorite story out of the book? Or what do you think is the most pertinent story in terms of what we can learn about this phenomenon?
The showdown with Brandy Howe and the two Syrians. Now, when John was dictating this and he brought the swords in, that night I called my son and I said, "Brandon, I'm writing a book and I'm probably going to get laughed at in public, but I got to finish it. I quit it 8 years ago on the guy. I mean, I just could not believe where this was going, with the swords and everything. And I just wrote it as I was told it. It's John's story. I'm just his faithful scribe." And that turned out to be, like, really, from what I've learned since the book published, the most extraordinary part of the book. And Brandy was an extraordinary person to meet and interview for the book as well. She didn't want any first person in the book, but she gave me her time. The moment she picked up the phone, and this happened years ago, she said, I've just recently, a few weeks ago, been given permission to talk about this. I've been making some notes. And this was so endemic to this storytelling that I thought people were pulling my leg. I thought like I was the Lee Harvey Oswald in this book. But I said, no, this is all real. It really happened. I mean, the purple lightning. Brandy had memory problems for about 5 years after that. I called it, an initiation, like Gandalf with the Balrog. This confrontation, this traumatic confrontation. The Syrian walk-ins, one went insane and had to be institutionalized, and the other had to go underground with his family. And this is a contact sport. This is real.
When you say that he had to go underground, do you mean that he just went out of circulation?
Yeah, out of circulation, yeah.
Was that because the experience had terrified him?
They both had visits from the thing. Brandy and the two Syrians had visits from the Men in Black. And not everybody squares off with them the way John Edmonds does. Apparently they can be quite intimidating.
Yeah, I wonder if there's also a mental component to that as well. I think what's fascinating about the story, for me, in terms of a symbologist, is that the sword in the angelic tradition is related to the cherubim, so there's an etymological connection between cherub and keruv, which is a sword. So the cherubim traditionally are shown with a sword. Now, again, the cherubim are also identified in the Arabic with a vessel, or a ship. So there is this etymological correlation with carib, which is a small type of vessel. So again, and I think it's very interesting how this is interrelated. And certainly when I read the book, I thought, well, there's no way that either Bruce or John would know this. And it's almost like it's a detail which kind of a lot of people would just say, that's it, it's just too much, it's just too imaginary, I just can't take that anymore. And so for me, it wasn't a type of detail that a person who was, let's say, making it up would add to the book. To me, it felt genuine, and I felt that the sword was a very important symbolic component, because it tells you specifically who these beings are. And so for me, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of John communicating in symbolism, do you feel that these beings communicate in symbolism? Because there is an interesting part in the book in which you talk about that having a conversation with the beings, although may only take a few minutes, sometimes feels like that the amount of information is several hours. And I compare this in symbolism, that the symbol compacts multiple ideas. So a symbol is almost like an encyclopedia of ideas. And so has there also been a symbolic component to this phenomenon?
Well, and it's not just with me. I mean, everybody pretty much that comes to the ranch that feels a connection here, for years and years afterwards, they will contact me and they will say they feel like they're just becoming consciously aware of some of the things that happened to them while they were here. And they will tell me that they thought that they received a massive download of information. And that at first it just seems like a lot of noise, and they tried very hard to shut it out and not pay any attention to it. But over time, it begins to unwind and begins to defrag and becomes a clear message to them. And it seems like everybody has different messages, but it changes their lives. And they begin to be in a whole different space than they used to be. And they seem to have a different outlook on life. And, it's done that with me. It's certainly made me a much more thoughtful person in terms of realizing how much there really is in this dimension, in this world, beyond what we just would normally think about, during our average day. And, I get this all the time from people. Plus, I get people that, from all around the world that will literally tell me they've been in the middle of the jungle someplace doing something, and all of a sudden they were told to come to the ranch and meet me. And, they've traveled great distances to sit for a couple of days in a chair and just have conversations with me about things. And, it's just fascinating the way it works. It's as if this ranch, not only is it a portal to other places and other times, but it is a draw for individuals from around the world that seem to feel that they absolutely have to come here and be part of this. And, I always tell everybody, everything that I want to do because of this place is I want to create a better world, a healthier world. I want to be able to bring the technology forward that can change the world in a positive way. Well, all those downloads have been given to me, and they've been given to other people that come here for their own individual journey and their path. And so the symbolic side of this thing is tremendously huge.
Right. It's very interesting when you referred to the technology. In terms of the portals, do you think that some of the portals are technological? I mean, some of them may be geomagnetic, for example, but are some of these portals technological?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, I have people that are leading scientists that say that they had hit a block in their work and they needed to come here in order to see if they could clear it. And they'll come and they'll talk to me about things that previously all I had was maybe a high school, background or maybe a semester in college or two. And so I'm familiar with it, but I don't know really anything about it. And these guys will come and they will sit here for days and tell me how it all works and why it works and why it's important. And they're overjoyed because suddenly the block is gone and they can continue their work. And so I think the ranch, in some respects, it's not just a bridge. In one respect, it's a bridge for many people in their personal life.
Okay. You mentioned that you yourself, that you've had a download of information. Do you want to elaborate what that download is or the nature?
Well, I'm a little reticent to do that because the information that I've been given needs to be created. And so I'm actually working with teams right now to create the financial structure to be able to build some of these operational demonstrations of what's capable of being done. The whole idea is about solving world problems at a macro level. And we're getting the information and we're putting together the teams and the money to make it work.
Right. Okay, Bruce. Do you feel that that's a similar situation to yourself in terms of you're a very different type of person from starting the book to completing the book?
Stardust Ranch, The Incredible True Story, was an initiatic experience for me. My consciousness has changed since writing the book. One of the spin-offs for me, one of the contemplations for me, is what is the struggle on this planet? When we talk about man-made portals, you go back in the history of physics, you look at James Clerk Maxwell, how he got shut down, how his work didn't blossom. And, he was studying electromagnetic energy, and he said that, light and electricity and magnetism were one thing in three different forms, like vapor, ice, and water. And it just stops there. And we go into all this knuckle-dragging science. So I'm very curious about what elements in the human experience are holding us back. There's an oppressive force here. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I concur. Again, people tend to look at this as being good or bad, but my opinion on this in terms of, let's say, the hierarchy which is governing the Earth is that this hierarchy has planted many different planets, and they do seem to be a predaceous force, and I think that they're very interested in emergent systems. So these are, if you like, they're studying systems of evolution, and because the currency in the universe, from what I can understand, is knowledge. So this is the actual currency within the universe. And so I think that these beings themselves are trying to remain at the top of the learning curve. Generally speaking, I do think that entities, in terms of evolution, that most entities move towards equilibrium. They're neither very spiritual nor very destructive or predaceous. But I do think that there are sometimes a minority of species which are either very spiritual or very predaceous. And I do think that the beings which are, shall we say, controlling this planet are predaceous.
Yes.
But
I'd like to add something to your thought there. One of the things that I've realized immensely through not only Bruce and I writing the book, But the thing is this, and that is humanity wants to do better. The problem is they don't know how, they don't understand the process, and they don't understand that the largest component of this whole issue is not necessarily the knowledge of the specifics about how to create a world. It is about the spirituality of the desire to work together and to learn the spiritual lessons necessary to be able to create a better world. And that has been historically the single largest problem. And what I'm seeing now from the individuals that keep coming through, not only from portals, but from, actually they're being awakened for whatever reason, and they're coming here to the ranch to discuss with me and sit down and have these fabulous, amazing discussions, is the fact that they're waking up to their necessary position to as far as this whole spiritual thing goes. And it's absolutely fascinating, because I believe that we're going to see a better world because of this. And I think we're right on the cusp of it right now.
Absolutely. I'm very optimistic myself. I do think that we are moving towards a better world. I mean, I do think that the genie is out of the bottle, and although the internet is a two-edged sword in terms of that there is a lot of disinformation, we are seeing an expansion of information and consciousness. And I actually think that the technology is an expansion of something which is far greater, which is something which we could describe as being spiritual. So the technology itself is not regressive, but it is actually an expression of where we are going in terms of humanity. I just think that we just obviously need to be careful in terms of how we utilize that technology, and it is getting the balance in the world. You know, technology can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It can be used to preserve the world, or it can be used negatively to control resources. Do you have any takes on the spiritual aspect of this phenomenon, Bruce?
Yeah. So as we got towards the end of the book, a lot of my connection to what we're talking about, the extraterrestrial phenomenon, is the internal component. As I mentioned, I've been a fairly diligent meditator since my late teens, and I'm 53 now. So I have a lot of internal experiences, and one of the things that the exopolitics movement does is it tries to externalize everything. And one of the things that I wanted to get across in the book, that, wait a minute, a lot of what we're calling extraterrestrial phenomenon is going to take place in your consciousness. It's going to take place in your mind, either first or after a physical manifestation. Your internal landscape will be changed. So try to synchronize the two to understand the whole experience.
And I think that's basically the conclusion of my book in terms of consciousness. There is really, I mean, we make the distinction that there is a distinction between consciousness, or the spiritual aspect, and physicality, but they're one and the same thing. And the waveform is the particle, and the particle is the waveform. So I'm in complete agreement with you there. There is obviously a tendency to externalize it and say, well, they're aliens or they're coming from a certain planet, but they're more than that, because they have deconstructed the mechanics of reality. So they are outside of time. They exist in different universes, and some of these universes are a part of our own universe, but some of these are interdimensional. And again, they've not only deconstructed the external universe, but they deconstructed the mechanics of ideas, the imaginal realm, the spiritual realm. And so they have this tremendous resource. And again, meditation is about tuning into this resource, which is the imaginal realm, the realm of ideas, which is the spiritual realm. And I think that this is certainly found within near-death experience, in which many people have what are almost hallucinogenic experiences, but they're not hallucinations, because if you study near-death experience within blind people, you understand that they also are having the same experience. And so what they're actually doing is they're going into the world of ideas, and they are merging with this world of ideas. And these beings, they themselves have access to this realm. I mean, myself, I feel that they're doing this technologically, but they've also expanded their minds as well. And as we said before, there is very little difference between the mind and consciousness. So this is where we're at with the beings. It's a very sophisticated and it's very complex phenomenon, and it's not just related to one aspect, it's multidimensional. So I've got an interesting quote here, and I did mention this earlier, but I wrote it down in my notebook, and it's kind of standing off the page, so I'm just going to mention this. You wrote, a 2 or 3 minute interaction with these beings can come to represent 3 or 4 hours of time in your mind as you unpack the information. It's a little like a zip file on a computer. Once you open it up, it's got more data than the size suggests. And so I think that's actually quite profound.